The courtroom buzzed with a low murmur of spectators, a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled amusement. At the center of it all sat Judge Raymond Calloway, a man known less for his wisdom and more for his sharp tongue. He leaned back in his towering chair, peering down over the rim of his glasses at the trembling woman before him. "Let me get this straight," he scoffed, flipping through the case file with exaggerated boredom. "You, a fast food worker, expect this court to believe that you were unfairly fined for a parking violation?" His laughter echoed through the chamber, and a few chuckles followed from the audience. The woman, Claire Monroe, swallowed hard. She had spent the last of her paycheck just to get the day off for this hearing. "Your Honor, I have evidence that—" "Oh, please," Calloway interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "People like you waste this court's time with your sob stories." Claire clenched her fists, her face burning with humiliation. But what Judge Calloway didn't know was that within 10 minutes, the balance of power would shift drastically, and for the first time in his career, he would find himself on the other side of the law. Claire Monroe's hands trembled as she clutched the stack of papers in her lap, her knuckles white from gripping them too hard. The fluorescent lights of the courthouse lobby buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the line of anxious plaintiffs and defendants waiting for their turn. Claire wasn't supposed to be here. Not today. Not ever. She belonged behind the counter of Burger Haven, taking drive-thru orders and flipping burgers to scrape together rent money for the tiny apartment she shared with her younger brother, Tyler. At 26, she had long accepted that life wasn't fair. Their parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving Claire to take on the role of both guardian and provider. She had dropped out of college, put aside her dreams of becoming a paralegal, and picked up as many shifts as she could just to keep them afloat. But no matter how hard she worked, something always seemed to push her 2 steps back. This time, it was a parking ticket, except it wasn't hers. She had loaned her old Honda to a co-worker, Maria, who had parked near a broken meter. Claire had proof. Text from Maria admitting to the mistake, and an email from the city's parking department acknowledging the meter was faulty. But when Claire tried to contest the fine, her appeal was denied without review. That was when she realized she had no choice but to show up in court and fight for herself. "Miss Monroe?" A court clerk called, breaking her out of her thoughts. She inhaled sharply and stood, her nerves tightened like a vice around her chest. The other people in the waiting area barely looked at her, each lost in their own legal battles. But Claire felt as if every eye in the building was on her as she walked toward the courtroom. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and worn leather, the kind of smell that clung to courthouses like an unshakable ghost of past rulings. The judge's bench loomed high above, and there, sitting in his black robes, was Judge Raymond Calloway. He was infamous in the city, a man whose reputation was built on belittling those who couldn't fight back. He had a particular disdain for people like Claire, the working class, the ones who couldn't afford high-powered lawyers or legal fees. As Claire stepped forward, her heart pounded. She wasn't asking for much, just fairness, just a chance. But as soon as Judge Calloway sneered at her and flipped open her file, she knew exactly what kind of battle she was walking into. Claire gripped the edge of the defendant's podium, her nails pressing into the cheap, varnished wood. She had rehearsed what she would say 100 times, but now, standing before Judge Calloway, her voice wavered. "Your Honor," she began, holding up her paperwork, "I have evidence that the parking meter was broken and the fine was issued unfairly." The city even acknowledged. Calloway sighed dramatically and held up a hand, cutting her off. "Miss Monroe, do you think this courtroom is here for your personal grievances? Do you have any idea how many people come in here claiming they're special?" A few muffled chuckles rippled through the courtroom. Claire's face burned. "I'm not saying I'm special," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Calloway leaned forward, tapping his gavel against his desk like an impatient schoolteacher. "Miss Monroe, let me save you some time. The fine stands. You can either pay it today or have your wages garnished. Next case." Claire's breath hitched. "But..." Next case. Calloway's voice boomed, echoing through the chamber. The courtroom door swung open as the bailiff motioned for the next person to step forward, but Claire didn't move. This wasn't just about the fine anymore. It was about dignity. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice louder now. "You didn't even look at my evidence." Calloway smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Fair? Life isn't fair, Miss Monroe. You think flipping burgers gives you a right to argue with a judge." More laughter. Something inside Claire snapped. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to be humiliated like this. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and tapped the record button. "Say that again, Your Honor." The room fell silent. Calloway's smirk faltered. The bailiff took a step forward. "Ma'am, you can't record in here." But Claire wasn't backing down. "I came here prepared. I followed the law. And instead of doing your job, you mocked me. I wonder what the city council would think about a judge who refuses to hear evidence." For the first time, Calloway's expression darkened with something other than amusement. He slammed his gavel down. "Bailiff, remove her from my courtroom." Claire's heart pounded as the bailiff approached, but she didn't care. She had something more valuable than a dismissed case now: proof. As she was escorted out, she saw Calloway shift uncomfortably in his seat. He knew, just as she did, that this wasn't over. And in a matter of minutes, the tables would turn. Claire stormed out courthouse, her pulse still pounding in her ears. The humiliation clung to her like a second skin, but beneath it, something stronger burned: determination. Judge Calloway had dismissed her, mocked her, and treated her like she was nothing. But he was wrong. She refused to be nothing. As soon as she reached the parking lot, she pulled out her phone and replayed the recording. "You think flipping burgers gives you a right to argue with a judge?" The word sent a fresh wave of anger through her. Claire knew this wasn't just about her anymore. How many others had stood before that man, only to be dismissed like they didn't matter? How many people had left this courthouse feeling powerless? She took a deep breath and did something she had never done before. She posted the clip online. A spark ignites. By the time Claire's shift at Burger Haven ended that night, her phone was buzzing nonstop. Maria, her co-worker and best friend, ran up to her in the break room, eyes wide. "Claire, your video, it's blowing up." Claire frowned and unlocked her phone. The clip had been shared thousands of times. Comments flooded in. "This judge is a disgrace. How is he allowed to treat people like this? I had a case with Calloway last year. He did the same thing to me." Claire's heart raced. She had never expected this. Then a notification popped up. "Local news wants to interview you." Her breath caught. This wasn't just some viral rant anymore. This was real, facing doubt. But with attention came risk. That night, as she sat at the small kitchen table across from Tyler, she couldn't ignore the worry in his eyes. "Claire, you sure about this?" he asked, pushing his food around his plate. "Calloway is powerful. What if he comes after you?" Claire hesitated. Tyler had always been the cautious one. He was still in high school, still figuring out his own future, and she had spent years protecting him. She had been his shield. Now, for the first time, she was stepping into the fire. "I have to do this," she said finally. "Not just for me, for everyone he's bullied." Tyler sighed. "Just be careful, okay?" The backlash. The next morning, Claire's phone rang. "Miss Monroe?" The voice on the other end was deep and serious. "This is David Langston from Channel 7 News. We'd love to have you on our evening broadcast to talk about Judge Calloway." Claire swallowed hard. Okay." She agreed to the interview, but the moment she hung up, a different call came through. "Miss Monroe, this is Robert Caldwell. I'm Judge Calloway's attorney. My client strongly suggests you remove that video immediately. Otherwise, we'll pursue legal action for defamation." Claire's stomach twisted. She wasn't prepared for this, but she had the truth. "Tell your client I'll see him in court," she said, and hung up. A City Awakens. The news interview aired that night. Claire sat stiffly in a chair across from the anchor, her hands clenched together in her lap. "We've received numerous complaints about Judge Calloway's behavior over the years," the anchor said. "But your video seems to have been the tipping point. What do you hope to accomplish?" Claire took a deep breath. "I just want fairness. No one should be treated the way he treated me. If he won't respect the law, he shouldn't be in charge of it." By the next morning, the mayor's office had released a statement. An internal review of Judge Calloway's conduct has been opened. Claire had done it. She had forced them to listen, but she wasn't prepared for what came next. The twist no one expected. A week later, Claire was on her way home when she saw something that made her blood run cold. A black car was parked in front of her building. A man in a suit leaned against it, watching her. She slowed, her heart hammering. Was this Calloway's doing? She took a deep breath and walked forward. "Can I help you?" The man smirked and pulled out a badge. "Agent Harris, Department of Justice. You might want to hear what we found on Judge Calloway." Claire blinked. "Excuse me." Harris motioned for her to step aside. "You've stirred up quite the storm. And you were right. Calloway isn't just a bad judge. He's a criminal." Claire's breath hitched. The man's been fixing cases for years, favoring certain attorneys, dismissing evidence, even taking bribes. Harris looked at her with something like admiration. "Thanks to your video, we opened an investigation. And as of 10 minutes ago," he smirked, "Calloway's been arrested." Claire's knees nearly gave out. "He's what?" "Arrested. Turns out belittling innocent people was the least of his crimes." A stunned laugh bubbled out of her. She had set out to fight a parking ticket. Instead, she had helped take down a corrupt judge. She wasn't powerless anymore, and neither was anyone else. Claire stood in front of the courthouse, the very same one where she had been humiliated just days ago. But this time, she wasn't here as a powerless fast food worker pleading her case. She was here as the woman who had helped take down Judge Calloway. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in her direction. "Miss Monroe, how does it feel knowing your video led to the judge's arrest? Did you ever expect this outcome? Do you think this will change how the court treats everyday people?" The weight of it all pressed down on her, but she stood tall. "I didn't set out to expose a corrupt judge," she said, her voice steady. "I just wanted fairness, respect, the same thing every person who walks into this courthouse deserves." A murmur spread through the crowd. She could see people, workers, single parents, students, nodding in agreement. Then the doors to the courthouse burst open. 2 federal agents emerged, leading Judge Calloway in handcuffs. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The once untouchable man, the one who had laughed at her, now wore an expression of cold fury as he was marched past cameras. Claire's heart pounded as their eyes met. For a moment, Calloway sneered, his arrogance flickering. "Enjoy your 15 minutes of fame," he hissed. "You think this changes anything? People like me always land on their feet." Claire could have fired back, thrown every ounce of her anger in his face. But she didn't. She didn't need to. Instead, she smiled. "No, Judge Calloway. People like me are the ones who stand back up, and we don't fall so easily." The agents pulled him forward, and Claire watched as the man who had belittled so many was forced into the back of a police car. A cheer erupted from the crowd. People clapped, some even whistled. The weight on Claire's chest lifted, replaced by something new. Hope. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. This was about every person who had ever been ignored, dismissed, or told they didn't matter. And today, they had won. Claire sat in the break room of Burger Haven, staring at the screen of her phone. The image of Judge Calloway in handcuffs had gone viral, splashed across every major news outlet. "Former judge arrested on corruption charges." The headlines read. She still couldn't believe it. "Girl, you're famous." Maria burst into the room, waving her phone. "They're calling you a hero." Claire let out a breathy laugh. A hero? I just wanted to fight a parking ticket. Maria plopped down beside her. Yeah, and in the process, you took down a corrupt judge. That's not nothing. Claire shook her head, a smile playing at her lips. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that courtroom, defeated and dismissed. She had stood her ground, and it had mattered. Come on, Claire. You can't tell me this hasn't changed everything, Maria pressed. Claire hesitated. Had it? A new path forward. Later that night, Claire walked into her small apartment to find Tyler pacing the living room. He turned the moment she stepped inside. You got another letter, he said, holding up an envelope from the community college. Her stomach tightened. She had applied for a scholarship months ago, before everything had happened. But after the disaster in court, she had convinced herself she wasn't going anywhere. You gonna open it? Tyler asked. Claire took a deep breath and tore it open. Her eyes scanned the letter, and suddenly, the words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Claire, she looked up at her brother, her voice shaky. I got it. You got it. His face lit up. You mean? I got the scholarship, she whispered, as if saying it too loudly would make it disappear. For so long, she had thought she was stuck. A girl flipping burgers, struggling to make ends meet, never meant for more. But she had fought back against someone powerful. She had used her voice. And now, for the first time, she saw a way out. Tyler hooped, grabbing her in a hug. You deserve this, Claire. She closed her eyes, holding on to the moment. Maybe, just maybe he was right. A ripple effect. The next morning, Claire's phone buzzed with another message. But this time, it wasn't a threat or a news inquiry. It was from someone she had never met. I saw your video. Judge Calloway nearly ruined my life too. Thank you for standing up to him. Another message popped up. Because of you, they're reopening my case. I might finally get justice. Claire stared at the screen, overwhelmed. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. Judge Calloway's arrest had led to a full investigation, uncovering years of corruption. Dozens of cases were being reviewed, and people who had been wrong were finally getting their voices heard. And it had started with a single act of defiance. One last visit. A week later, Claire found herself back at the courthouse, not as a defendant, not as a victim, but as someone who had changed the course of justice. She stepped into the office of the court clerk, where a middle-aged woman sat behind the desk. The same woman who had smiled at her that day in court, offering kindness when no one else had. The clerk's eyes lit up when she saw Claire. I was hoping I'd see you again, she said warmly. That was quite a show you put on. Claire smiled. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. And yet, here you are, the clerk said, standing. Tell me, Claire, what's next for you? Claire hesitated, but for the first time, the answer felt clear. I think I want to go into law, she admitted. Maybe help people the way no one helped me that day. The clerk smiled. I think you'd be good at it. Claire took a deep breath. She had spent years believing she was powerless. But now she knew the truth. She wasn't powerless. And she never had been. Neither was anyone else. And as she walked out of that courthouse, she knew she was walking towards something bigger, something better, a future she had built for herself. Epilogue, a new chapter. 3 years later, Claire walked up the steps of the courthouse. This time, not as a defendant, not as a witness, but as a law student shadowing a defense attorney. The building that had once been a symbol of humiliation and injustice now felt different. It was a place of change, a place where people like her could make a difference. She adjusted the strap of her bag, her fingers brushing against a pin on her lapel, a small symbol of the pro bono legal aid group she had joined, dedicated to helping people who couldn't afford proper representation. As she stepped inside, her phone buzzed. A message from Tyler. Proud of you, sis. Mom would be too. She swallowed the lump in her throat, smiling. She had come so far, from a struggling fast food worker to a woman fighting for justice. Judge Calloway had been convicted on multiple counts of corruption, his victims given a chance to have their cases reviewed. Because of him, policies had changed, oversight had strengthened. But more importantly, because of her, people had found their voices. Claire took a deep breath and stepped forward. This was just the beginning.